Right, so before we get started, there is one thing that I want to note. Some of the terminology that's going to be used in this presentation is outdated and it is deemed offensive. The reason I'm using this terminology is because it's for research purposes. It's necessary for you to know, as the audience, to learn when you're conducting your research so that it's accurate. So you know what you're going to see, but also you know what to look for if you need to find specific types of records. All right, so just a brief history of the federal census. It was established by the Constitution on March the 4th in 1789. And the purpose of the census was to conduct a full inventory of everyone in the United States to determine representation in government. So 1790, the following year, was the first federal census. It has occurred every 10 years since then. Some of the 1790 census was actually lost in the War of 1812. So if you have relatives from the states of Delaware, Georgia, Kentucky, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia, you might not be able to find those parts of the census from 1790. So the 72-year rule, some people know about this, some people don't. So the 72-year rule, the purpose of this is to protect citizen privacy. So a census is not released until 72 years after it was taken. So April of this year, April 1st of 2023, the 1950 census was released to the public. So we had access to actually see those records. They became public. The 1960 census will be released on April 1st of 2032. I said 2023, I meant 2022, I'm sorry. The vast majority of the 1890 census was lost to fire in 1921. In one of the buildings where the records were housed, there was a big fire. Only about 1% of the 1890 census survived. What didn't burn had a lot of water damage. There have been efforts to recover and transcribe some of what was in that fire, so you may be lucky and find little pieces, but generally it's all considered to be lost. Outside of the 72-year rule, if you need records from 1960 to 2020, the person named in the record or their heir can obtain a copy of the census record. So if you want to look at the census record for one of your parents in, say, 1970, you can submit a request to, I think, I can't remember which one it is, but there's a form. It's called the BC 600. So the BC 600 is the form that you would use to obtain census records between 1960 and 2020. Now, I don't know exactly what they mean by heirs, but I imagine it's probably going to be very direct relatives that you can obtain those records for. But if you look that up, it'll give you more information on exactly who you can receive that record for. So let's talk a little bit about the types of federal census records that exist. So you guys are probably most familiar with the population schedules. Those were the census records that started in 1790 and continue on today. But we do have a lot of other types of census schedules that were taken throughout history of the census, and sometimes they can be useful. Also, keep in mind, this is not a comprehensive list. There's a lot of different schedules out there. And within these individual schedules that I've listed, there's even more. So do your own research if any of these interest you or you think you might be able to find information you need on them, just to see what else is involved with those census schedules. But I want to touch on these a little bit. So we had housing schedules that occurred between 1940 and 1990. So that's something you can look for as far as like housing. I haven't dug deep into those, so I don't know what specific information you get from them, but those are available. Then we have non-population schedules. So this includes agriculture. Those were taken between 1850 and 1880. This provided the name of the owner or manager of a farm, the improved and unimproved acreage, livestock that was owned, goods produced, and the value of the farm, machinery, and livestock. Then we have the defective, dependent, delinquent classes. That was taken in 1880. So these are a number of different schedules. So on the 1880 census, these were identified in columns 15 to 20, and they all can be found on separate schedules. So for the insane, they used schedule 2. For the categorization of idiot, which also means severe mental deficiency, deaf mutes, and the blind, those were on schedules 3, 4, and 5. Homeless children in institutions are on schedule 6. We had incarcerated on schedule 7, and then the poor receiving public aid on schedule 7A. So again, if you want to dig deeper into those, you can kind of look up information about the defective dependent delinquent classes in 1880 to find that out, but that's just a brief overview there. So the mortality schedules, those record deaths that occurred in the year preceding the census date of June 1st. So if the census is being taken in June of 1820, then anyone that died prior to that, prior to June of 1820, between 1819 and 1820, then they'll be recorded. The 1850 and the 1860 census might include names of enslaved people who died. They didn't always, but sometimes it might have gotten recorded. So that's one way that you could possibly get names of slave ancestors through mortality schedules. Social statistics, those recorded information about churches, cemeteries, social clubs, schools, newspapers, and more. Those are available at the National Archives site, or some of them might be in some local state archives, or state archives, not local. The American Indian Schedule, that was taken in 1880, and it was done in unsettled areas and on reservations in California and the territories of Washington and Dakota. There is not a census for every tribe. So they did not go out and locate every tribe that was out there and take a census for them. So it's very scattered. And then the slave census schedules were done in 1850 and 1860. Those identified the slaves only by age, gender, and color. And their color would have been identified as either Black or mulatto. Prior to 1850, slaves would have just been noted. There was a category on the census where the owner of the home and the slaves, their name would be listed, and then it would have marked based on gender and age. So, women, 1 to 18. So that's how the slaves would be marked prior to that, if at all. So I'm going to give an opportunity here really quick for any questions before we move on. Next, we're going to talk about what we can learn from the census record. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them there into the chat. Go ahead and move to the next slide, but you can still pop your question in there. I'll still see it. Okay, so what can we learn from a census record? It does vary from year to year. So it's based on the questions that are asked, and that changed every time the census was taken. So they always had a different set of questions that they asked each census year. Prior to 1850, only the head of the household was listed by name. All the other occupants were marked by their gender and their age range. So you didn't get names for spouse and children prior to 1850. After 1850, everybody got named, everybody got their age and gender recorded. So you have more identifying information about the family as a whole from 1850 on. Birthplace is generally given the birth year. The approximate age, and I say approximate age because it just depends on when the census was taken. Maybe it was a month before someone's birthday, so they say they're 10, but they're about to turn 11. So you get approximate age of someone at the time of the census. You'll also get children's names and ages. You can get occupations, and generally anyone in the household that was working, they would list the occupation for them. Oftentimes the parent's birthplace, year of immigration, if there was one, and along with that, naturalization status and year. So, those would be two separate categories, a year of immigration, but then was that person naturalized, and if so, when? Marital status, married, never married, widowed, and there'll usually be a letter or abbreviation for those different terms. The length of the marriage, sometimes you'll find that. Military service, and if they owned any property or if they rented their home, if it was a farm, things along those lines. Okay, so we're going to talk just a minute about state census records. These are really useful for a number of reasons. So one is that they don't fall under that 72-year rule. So if a state has taken a census, then you should be able to access that somewhere. Someone, either whether it's through Ancestry or state archives, libraries, other resources, you should be able to get those. So these are usually done during the 5th year of the decade. So the 5 years between our standard federal census. And I really like that because it fills in the gaps between the census years, but it also helps you when there's maybe a census year missing. Maybe you couldn't get 1800, but you were able to find 1795 or 1805. So you got a little bit more information around the time that you were looking for. And I like it too because a lot of times with children, children, they're typically at home maybe 20 years. So that's only 2 censuses they could probably be on. But if you're getting state census records, you can oftentimes get more about the children in between those times, like when they're born and maybe when kids are moving out. Sometimes states will also ask different questions than the federal census. So you might garner a little more information than you would from the federal. Some states also kept their mortality schedules. And then a couple things to note is that not every state conducted their own census. So sometimes they didn't do it at all. Sometimes they did a lot of them. Sometimes they just did it once. I'm going to provide you guys with a document of resources after the program. I'm going to email that out to everyone. One of the links that's on there is just to a Wikipedia page, and it lists all the states and what census they did and what years. So that's really handy, so you know which years to look for which states you're looking in. The last state census was taken in Massachusetts in 1985. So if you have people in Massachusetts, then you might have a lot of years to look through. And then also, there were some colonies that conducted partial or complete censuses of their citizens. So prior to 1776, you think 1776, we became an official country. Our first federal census was 1790, but you may be able to find partial or complete census records prior to 1776 when we had our colonies. So that's something to be on the lookout for as well. So in a minute, we're going to move into where to find census records. If we don't have any questions, again, just pop them in the chat if you have any. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to this next slide. It's just pretty simple, a list of places where you can find census records. And I imagine most of you already are aware of these. You can go to the National Archives and Records Administration online, also called NARA. So NARA.gov is the website. But there are also National Archives facilities. There's one in DC, and then also in other places around the country, generally near a large city. And you can actually go to those facilities because some of their records are still in microfilm. They haven't been indexed and made available online. So sometimes you have to actually go places. So you can look up on the National Archives website to see where those facilities are, and then find out where additional records might be located that would be useful for you. Of course, Ancestry, but I've also noted here, if you're local to St. Mary's County, you can come into the library. You can use Ancestry for free. We have Ancestry Library Edition that we pay for. but you can fully research and access records through the library edition. Then there's always Family Search, that is free. That is the site through the Latter-day Saints, and they have most of the same records that Ancestry does. Your state archives are sometimes a really great place to look. Of course, public libraries and historical societies as well. All right, so we're going to talk about some tips for those difficult to find ancestors. I don't know if any of you noticed, but I'm sitting in front of a brick wall. If you've done your research long enough, you've hit a brick wall before. Sometimes ways to get around those are just trying some new things, try something different. So one of the things that we can do is try variations and misspellings of our ancestors' surnames. So I used an example here of Royal, but we've also been able to find that as Royals. You could see Royal with 2 L's, and I've seen it without the O, Ryle or Riles. So this is an ancestor of mine, and these are all ways I've seen this name spelled. I think at some point the name was spelled one specific way. Over time, once the people came from England to the colonies, it eventually morphed into Royal. So you can try all of the different ways to spell the name, but you can also use the wild card. So the wild card is that little asterisk that you put in place of letters. And I've just put some examples here of ways to use that. So we can look for words that start with ROY and then put that asterisk there, and it'll kind of fill it in. Next one, I just put the asterisk there in place of the A. The other one, I replaced the O and the A. So try different ways of using the wild card, and you'll get likely different results each time you try it. And a lot of them might be completely wrong, but you might have that one hit of that strange way that the name is written that you find by using that wild card. So it's really important to play around with that. I'm also really guilty of not making note of what I've done. What surnames did I look for? What wild cards did I use? And then once I start doing it, I kind of forget, or I'll go back to it in the future and I go, I have no idea what I did. So just make note of that for yourself. You can also try searching using middle names instead of first names. Sometimes people went by their middle name. So putting first and middle might not be the right way to find them. You might need to use just the middle and the last name in order to find the person. The other thing that you want to do is look at the whole handwritten record. So the record that was written out by hand, you want to look at that, because as we know, those handwritings could be so messy. And someone has transcribed that for us to get the digital version, to get it online. And in that transcription process, sometimes they guess, or they just, it looks different to them than it looks to us. And you know what you're looking for. And it might make a lot more sense to you if you see it written out than how it was transcribed. So if you see something transcribed, if you see the digital write out of what is on the record, and you think, well, that's not quite right, but this could be my person, go look at that handwritten record, zoom in, look at the whole thing. Another reason that you want to do that is you might also find other relatives on the page, or you might find, say, a future in-law family, a future spouse of one of the children. Maybe they married a child from another family on the street. That often happened. Also, you can try, so say, for example, you're looking for head of household, but you can't find them. Look for the spouse, look for the children. I had an ancestor recently. I was looking through all the state and federal census records, and there was one where I could not find him, but I found his wife and their children. I still don't know where he was because he hadn't died yet. He came back later. So sometimes you have to search for other people in the house, maybe to find that family. And then okay, ancestor Joe Smith was here in 1870. He wasn't here in 1880, and then he was there in 1900. And then you can also use supplemental records for 1890, especially because we don't have it. But you might also think about this for other people that you can't find on the census. So city directories, jury rolls, voter registrations and lists, land and property records, and newspapers. Those are all different ways to find out where your family was and maybe what they were doing. Okay, so we're going to talk just a little bit about SOUNDEX. I actually researched SOUNDEX for this. I've never used it. I'm considering using it, but it takes a little bit of practice. So this is basically a coded surname index. And the reason this code was developed was to help with those instances where there's various spellings of a surname or the name has been misspelled throughout time. So you should be, the code for a surname will return lots of different results that are similar to what you're looking for. So it's a way to look for varied spellings. So I have on here the SOUNDEX coding guide right here. And so this tells you basically what number is assigned to what letter of the alphabet. So we look, for example, at the surname Washington. Now that would be W. You always do the first letter of the last name, and then you'll have 3 letters. There are some exceptions to some of the letters. So we don't code the vowels. So A, E, I, O, U do not get a code. And then the letters H, W, and Y do not get a code. So we just skip those letters altogether. So for Washington, we would have W. We don't have a code for the vowel A. S over here, S is coded as a 2. So there's our 2. H, we don't code the letter H. We don't code the vowel I. We go to N. The letter N is a 5, so there's our 5. And the letter G right here is a 2, so 2, 5, 2. So if we use a SOUNDEX, like up here, this is from Ancestry. When you put in your first and last name, so you would write the name out, you would select the exact and then SOUNDEX. So you could do sounds like or similar. But if you use the SOUNDEX, then it will do a SOUNDEX search. Oops, I'm sorry. My mistake. It will do a SOUNDEX search for you. If you come across a site that's coded differently and you may have to put in the code yourself, this gives you the ability to figure out what that code would be. So there's a lot of other rules. Some of them are listed here. Double letters. So if you have 2 letters, F together, I don't know why you would, but if you have the letter F together twice, you only count it as 1 letter. So you just count 1 F. So if you have different letters together, but they have the same code, you just treat it like 1 letter. Prefixes aren't coded. But you typically, actually, I'm sorry, they are coded, but you might find them without the code. So you should code it with and you should code it without. So do both. And then there's a whole bunch of different special rules for consonant separators that I wasn't going to go into here. And then surnames without 3 consonants will use zeros to fill out the code. So for example, my maiden name was spelled M-O-Z-O. There's 2 vowels and 2 consonants in that name. So, and the M would be, I'd have M. I can't code the the O. I'd code the Z, can't code the O. So mine would be MZ00 to take the place of the missing letters. SOUNDEX, like I said, takes a little more research if you want to use it, but it's just something that I wanted to put on you guys' radar. Any questions so far? Okay. So this is just a chart that I made so that you could see when the census was taken, the official start date, and the expected duration. So typically, the enumerators were required to get their districts done by a certain time. And so this tells you what that duration was, how much time they were given to get things done. But then I also listed the number of questions. And you can see over time, the number of questions vary, but they do increase considerably, the longer that the census is conducted. A couple of notes for 1870. That census, I guess there were some accusations of errors, and I'm not sure exactly what states, but some locations did take the census a second time in 1870 and 1871. So I don't know what that does to your results when you're looking. I haven't come across that, but it's something to be aware of. And then the 1890 census, of course, we don't really have that, but you can go to archives.gov and take a look and find out some more information about the 1890 census. So the reason I gave you this is just because it's good to be aware of the time period in which the census was taken. I mentioned the birthdays. So, you know, someone, you know, if it's occurring before or after their birthday, you have an idea of how the accuracy of their age in that census. Also, another thing when while we're talking about years and dates, when you're doing your research, you should always be aware of your history and what was happening in the world prior to the census, during the census, and how this would affect the people living in the house and maybe where the family lived. Wars, you know, with a war, we have generally the male head of household is not in the house. Economic depressions. So we have the Great Depression, but there were a lot of other economic downturns throughout history where we had recessions and some other small depressions, and those could have affected different areas differently. Pandemics, we had the flu pandemic of 1918. So a lot of lives were lost, but a lot of people, their lives were likely in flux. And so we don't know what that did to them as far as where they lived and what their jobs were and what they were doing. Environmental disasters. So for example, a huge one was the Dust Bowl. So this happened right around the time of the Great Depression, but people who were impacted by the Dust Bowl, they had to pick up and move because the land was arid and they couldn't survive. So a lot of people were moving all over the country at different points in history. And if you don't know, look it up, find out. But it is really critical to your research to know those things. Got a chat. Yeah, I can send you a copy of the slides, Kim, and I'll do that when I send out with the email and the other resources as well, for sure. Okay, just a quick cover on terminology used for race. So these are census terms that were used to identify race up to 1950, which is where we can look at. After that point, as you know, I'm sure you all at some point have filled out a current census record, and they have different ways of defining race now. So these were the terms throughout the course of from 1790 to 1950 that would have been used. A couple of definitions I want to give you. Mulatto is defined as someone with a white and a black parent. So basically they consider 50-50 makeup of your ancestry. Quadroon is defined as a person who is a quarter black. And then octoroon is identified as a person who is an eighth black. There were points in history where, and there were some states where this was being taken into consideration, and people were counted way, unfortunately. So these are terms that you may come across as you're doing research. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about enumeration districts. This is one of those things that it's easy to ignore when you're doing the census. It's at the top. It's sometimes abbreviated as ED. What these are is geographic areas that could be covered by a single enumerator in one census period. So an enumerator gets assigned a district and they say, within this time period we give you, you should be able to complete this district. Depending on where they were in the population, it could be a few city blocks, it could be an entire town, it could be a county. Depends on if the people are really spread out. It depends on if there's just a little bit of people, a lot of people. And enumeration districts weren't the same every year because the geographic boundaries changed of towns and counties. The population of places changed. So you can't, once you find out the enumeration district in a town that your ancestor lived their entire lives, you need to know what it was for each census year because it's likely going to change. They're listed at the top of each of the census sheet. Like I said, sometimes it's abbreviated with ED. It will be two numbers, a number, a dash, and a number. And let's see, where was I? So the first number, that's right. The first number is assigned to the county, and the second number is assigned to the specific enumeration period for that specific census. So again, they can change. Census records prior to 1880 usually just used the name of the post office or the town name instead of an enumeration district. They didn't start assigning those until 1880. You can find these at this website, stevemorse.org. And in just a minute, we're going to go to that website actually to look up something else that I'm going to show you. But it is a really useful website. It generates a lot of information for you very easily. And so one of the reasons I'm talking about this is because enumeration districts can sometimes help you to locate a difficult ancestor. Essentially, it gives you the ability to look through the whole census of an enumeration district. So if you can look up an enumeration district, you're looking at a county or a town or a whole area or a section of a city or a town. And so maybe you haven't found your ancestor. They're not popping up in your searches. This will give you the ability to look through each page of the census to see who is on there and who was recorded in that enumeration district. Sometimes a city or an area, if it's largely populated, might have multiple enumeration districts because it's divided into neighborhoods. Okay, the other thing that I want you to do is always record this. So it's always going to be at the top of your census sheet. It's not going to show up in your digitized results. If you look at Ancestry and it gives you the typed out list, it's not going to be on there. You have to go look at the record, look at the top of that record and see what the enumeration district was. But it also lists the enumerator. And maybe one of your ancestors was an enumerator. That's a cool thing to look at because they likely lived in that area. So look at to see who the enumerator was, see if it's anybody that was in your family at the time too. Okay, so errors. And there are a number of different ways for there to be errors in the census. So the enumerator could make errors. Sometimes they might guess a race or a gender. I have an ancestor. She's a great grand aunt. And I knew her, I met her as a child. And there was 1 or 2 times throughout her life on the census where she was marked as a male. If you'd met her, you would understand why. And I think that people were guessing. I think the census taker was making a guess. As an adult, she was the head of the household. She was a farmer. So they were making a guess. So you also have to think about just mistakes. People make mistakes. They spell things wrong. They hear wrong. They misunderstand. And then they might also assume that people are visiting the house or cousins in the home live there. I mean, maybe they're just there for a week visiting, but they happen to be there when the census got taken. They could have mistakenly got recorded as resident of that house. And then they may show up later on the census where they actually do live. That happens. Sometimes people are duplicated in a census year because of where they were at the time of the census being taken. Spelling errors, of course. We have phonetic spelling. So if someone says their name, the census taker might just spell it out phonetically. We also have to think about the education level of the enumerator and the reporter. Between the two of them, they may not have had a high level of education. They may not have been super great at spelling. So there may be errors there. And then we have people who have English as a second language. And not that they don't know how to spell, but there's a language barrier. And the enumerator may not have understood. And they couldn't clearly communicate with each other, which again makes errors. Other reasons for errors, sometimes information was provided by just one person in the house. Say the 15-year-old was home and the 15-year-old gave the information on mom and dad and their 3 siblings. Well, they're going to go on what they've heard over the years and they might guess at some of it. So it may not always be completely accurate. Information could come from a neighbor. If no one was home, the census taker might say, hey, can you vouch for these people and tell me about them? And they might have done that. Also, purposeful omissions by the informant. Some people were very protective of their privacy, and they did not want to give away certain information, and they may have omitted information or given false information for a number of reasons. Poor penmanship on the part of the enumerator can lead to indexing errors. So when the census is indexed and transcribed, it's hard to read, but also copies were made. So there could be errors in the copies. So the census taker, the enumerator, went out and took the census, they returned it, but then copies of that were made. Someone sat and made 2 or 3 copies of the census, and they may have done it wrong and may have made mistakes. And then there's, someone may be using their middle name instead of a first name. People use nicknames. Sometimes people used initials. So there's a lot of different reasons, and those aren't necessarily errors, but they are ways that your ancestors are listed in a way that you might not think about. So when you come across these things, you want to record everything the way it's written. So the name spelled wrong, if the year of birth's wrong or whatever, don't decide on your own that it's wrong and you fix it and write it how you know it should be. You need to record it the way it's written. You can make note of it somewhere and say, I think this is wrong. I think this was a misspelling. I think that this age is incorrect. You can make notes, but don't change the information you're given from the record. Because it might not be an error. It might be right. You might not know, you weren't there. And just use your logic when determining if, this person is in fact your ancestor, or is what you're looking at a logical error. It could be one of these things we've listed, or is it in fact written correctly? Is there a reason that it could be right? And of course, I'm sure looking at the other people in the house, you're saying, well, this name is spelled really different than what I know, but I think it's my ancestor because these other 4 people in the house line up with the other 4 people I have on the other census years. They're living in the same place they've always lived. This person's age is the same as it has been. It lines up with the other census years. Think critically. Don't just go, oh, I found it, yay, hooray. It might be wrong. It might be wrong when you think it's right, or it might look right, but it's actually wrong. So think before you start going down the wrong path, because that's not fun. Okay, so we're at the point where we found some ancestors. We found our people. Document and organize. Always document. And it's so hard because we get so excited and we just run with stuff. But it's really important to document what you find, where you found it, and as much information as you can from the record you're looking at. I'm going to show you a filled in blank census. Basically, you can download blank census forms and you can fill them in yourself. So it's just a blank form, and then you fill in your relevant ancestors on that sheet. So that's all you're looking at. You have that in your records, and all the information's right there in your handwriting that you can read. You want to put everybody that's in that household on there, and all the information that you see on that census. Even if you don't know what it means, if it's just some random code, write it down. And write everything as it's written. Again, don't change the information because you believe it's wrong. Write it as it's written. If it's spelled wrong, spell it that way. If they use abbreviations, use the abbreviations. Another thing is always write in pencil and have a really good eraser. I used to write in pen like a silly goose, and that's just no point to that. Just write in pencil and use a good eraser. And if you make notes in a notebook, so if you're not writing directly to that blank census worksheet and you're just taking notes, writing a log, write down the source of your information and write everything that you can that's on that record. Okay, so this is that example that I was talking about. So this is actually my great-grand-aunt that I was telling you about. And I only have her and her partner on here. And you see beside their names over on the left, I wrote 69 and 70. Those are the lines that they appear on the census record. So that's something you should always do, so that if you have to go back to the original census, Then I'll get to you in just a second, Kim. If you have to go back to the original record, you can find what lines they were on. So Willie B was on 69 and Vivian was on 70. No, this is not an Excel spreadsheet, Kim. I will send you in the resources a link to where, or information about where you can download blank forms. So like Ancestry and the archives and the family search, like a lot of websites, you can download and print these blanks. So that's what I did, is I printed a blank one and I filled it in pencil. Some of them are fillable PDFs where you can just type into it. That's fine too. But you start with a blank one and put just your ancestors' information. Yep, perfect. Okay, so the other thing is that up here at the top, I've recorded all of the location information that was on the record. They had block numbers. Right now, that's not helpful to me, but I recorded it because maybe I'll need it later. Here's the enumeration district, 6-19. And then the enumerator, the date that they took this information and the name of the enumerator, and then the sheet number. If you ever have a page number or a sheet number, record that too. You may need to go back later and reference that. And then just fill everything in pencil the way you see it. These you can keep in your records and refer back to them so you don't have to go hunt down that census somewhere that you have it. You just have these already like together with your ancestors file. Okay, so looking at this, I'm gonna show you, let's see, everything has numbers. So we've got the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we have a code. This is section A, code leave blank. Well, like the enumerator or somebody goes back and fills this code in later. We have a code B, we have a code C, code D, a code E, code F. So there's A through F in codes on this 1940 census. Well, obviously I have no idea what those codes mean. So that's what we're going to talk about next. It's codes. So on the 1930, 1940, and 1950 census, they used codes. And these involved things like occupations, native languages, things on the Indian census, and then other miscellaneous types of codes. So on that website that I mentioned, stevemorse.org, he also has a way that you can decipher codes. So I'm going to really quick try to show you that. Can you guys see that? That just popped up on your screen? Or do I have to pick that differently? Okay, good. Okay, so you can see that for 1930, 40, and 50, it has the different types of codes. So occupation codes, language and nativity codes, Indian codes. We were on the 1940 census. Most of what was there was miscellaneous. So if we look at, let's see, column A, it tells you this one is about the relationship to the head of household. So it tells you on the census, it told us that the head of household, and then the other was, I can't remember what it said, partner or something like that. And so if you look at the code was 6. It tells you lodger, roomer, boarder, or partner, wife, son, or daughter of a lodger, boarder, etc. So this red text changes when you pick a different code. Code 4 in column A would be a grandchild. So if you're looking at a census record from 1930, 40, or 50, and there's codes on it, you can come to this website, stevemorse.org, and look up the actual codes for those census records. It's really easy. It's very helpful. And then really quick, just to mention supplements, 1930, 40, and 50, they also had some supplements. They had the supplement schedule for Indian populations in 1930. 1940, 5% of the population was asked 16 supplementary questions, which if we go back really quick to this page, the 1940 census, my ancestor, Willie B., the head of household, and her partner, Vivian, they were asked the supplementary questions. And so they were one of that 5% that got asked the supplementary questions. And so it's nothing incredible, but I like, my family already knew she was a masseuse, but now I know when she was a masseuse, and I know she was a masseuse at a sanatorium. and it was in Fort Lauderdale. So I was able to like find a postcard picture of a sanatorium that used to exist in Fort Lauderdale. I mean, that's really cool. So if you're lucky enough, you might have an ancestor on 1940 or 50 who was asked supplemental questions, and then you might get a little more info about them down here. You never know. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so now we're going to talk about timeline. And this is where we're going to pull and organize our information together. So if you've been filling out your blank census sheets, so for whatever years you find your ancestor, you fill out the blank census sheet for everybody that's your family on there. And then you pull that information together and you make a timeline. Now, this is where you can use a Microsoft Word or Excel and just make a little chart for yourself. And that's what I did. I just used Excel on this example. And it doesn't have to have a lot of information, just the date of the event, their age at the time, what the event was, the source, and any notes you might have with it. And so we want this just to include like things with dates that are supported documentation, like major life events. So births, like the birth of your ancestor, but also the birth of their children, the deaths of the kids, the death of their spouse, their death, marriages, occupation, residence. So things directly related to your ancestor that are relevant to your research. So then when you look at it, you can look and see what you're missing. So I can see that she was born in 1915. I have the birth certificate. And then I have a census for 1920, 30, 40, a state census in 45 and 50. So there's nothing else for me to find because there aren't other state censuses. And then I have like a death index for her. So until 1960 is released and 1970 is released and 1980 is released, hopefully I'm still alive, I'll be able to see her on those other censuses, hopefully. But right now, as far as records are concerned, I have what I think all that I can find. Unless I want to try to find like employment records, which I'm probably not going to find because that sanatorium doesn't exist anymore. Land records, if you have those. So if I wanted to dig into land records, because she had a farm, she actually had a couple of farms at different times, I could go back and try to find land records, ownership records, deeds, things like that, and put it on this timeline. Now, I've noted not to include personal details on this. And the reason is that you don't want to get so much information on this timeline that you lose what you're looking for. And what you're looking for is to make sure that you've identified the necessary records to support this person's like life events, the dates of their, throughout their life. Later, you can create a second one of these that also includes more personal type information, like newspaper articles, so-and-so attended a party, just different personal things that happened in their life that kind of round out their life, because we know our lives are not just a series of dates. You want to know more about them, things that make them a person and round it out. And you can list in the notes. I have a picture of, like for example, in the personal one, I could say, I have a picture of her and her twin under the age of 5. But I don't want that on this one. This one, I just want to look at my records and the basic information that I have so far. So this is essentially just a very basic research timeline that you can make for yourself. And then later you can make more detailed timeline. There are some other ways to create timelines. They can be more elaborate. These are softwares that are either online or you can purchase, like download to your computer. Family Tree Maker, Roots Magic, History Lines, and Gene Lines. They all do have costs involved. I use Family Tree Maker. I haven't gotten deep into the like creating timelines and charts and that sort of thing, but it is something that you can do with the software. And then once you've purchased it, they send you, you can do updates and things along those lines. Okay, we're almost done. I just want to tell you guys about some upcoming genealogy programs that we have. So we're going to do how to preserve your family history at the Lexington Park branch on May 2nd. African American genealogy will be online May 17th. And then writing your ancestor stories will be online May 23rd. I'm going to teach that one. And that one I'm going to talk more about what we were just talking about here, of adding more of that personal information into the timeline, rounding out what we have about our relative, or maybe they're a family group, like that particular relative's family group, and then taking that and turning it into something, like turning it into a little booklet, or whatever you have to share with other people in your family, that tells a story about their life, more than just this is when they were born and this is when they died and they did some stuff in between. So that's what that writing your ancestor stories will be. Let me click. And if you're local, we have our Maryland room at the Leonardtown Library. And there we have a genealogy collection, which is owned by the St. Mary's County Genealogical Society. We have the Daughters of the American Revolution collection, which was donated to us by a former DAR member when she passed. And then our Maryland collection contains Maryland history as well as Maryland genealogy. So that's here at our branch in Leonardtown. That's my email if you want to reach out to me with questions, but I am going to send a, like I said, resources page to you in email. I'll also send a copy of the slides, and this will eventually be up on the library's YouTube channel so that you all can go back and look at it there if you want to.